What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala joins the show. We'll look ahead to the NFL Combine in Indianapolis next week and discuss the Broncos franchise tag options. All that and more coming up. Joining me here inside the Broncos podcast studio for today's episode of Broncos Now is Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala. Eric, thanks for joining me. How's it going?
It's going well, Sid. How are you?
Good. Enjoy your long weekend?
I did. It was nice.
Hit the links?
Got away a little bit, yeah. And but nice to be back. We're getting close here, Sid, to
I know.
Some exciting stuff. The league year is just a few weeks away, and it's gonna start heating up around here.
Yeah, well, exciting stuff coming up, Eric. Like you said, most timely news today, NFL teams can start to place franchise tags on their unrestricted free agents. Each team has 2 weeks to do so. No, there's not a ton of unrestricted free agent options with the Broncos right now, but do you think there's anyone that the Broncos could potentially place a franchise tag on this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. So typically you see it with younger guys coming off their first contract, which you would look at like a Lloyd Cushenberry there as a guy who's going to be a free agent coming off that rookie deal. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You never say never with this sort of thing, and maybe the Broncos value a guy more than maybe what the public perception might be. And we heard Sean Payton talk at the Super Bowl about how you've got to make your own decisions and you can't listen to what the NFL says in terms of that NFL kind of train of thought, as he called it. But that being said, I'd be surprised. It doesn't seem like a year where the franchise tag will be in play. Obviously, we've seen the Broncos use it before on a Justin Simmons, for example. They placed it on a Von Miller back in the day. Demaryius Thomas didn't end up having to use it. They signed long-term deals. But and from that standpoint, it doesn't necessarily seem like we're headed in that direction. And again, you never say never. Maybe there's maybe a surprise candidate. But just based on the cost of that and where the Broncos sit right now in terms of the salary cap and where, if they do decide to make a move here coming up, where they would be salary cap wise. George Payton kind of went ahead and said a few weeks ago, we're not going to be as active in that first wave of free agency. You can't be that every year. We know a couple years ago they viewed the Justin Simmons re-signing as one of their prime free agent acquisitions in a way. And so just kind of the way he talked about free agency as kind of sitting back, taking a step back from that first wave, I'd be surprised if the franchise tag was in play for the Broncos.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Justin Simmons was that the last time the Broncos placed a franchise tag on someone 2 years back-to-back, I believe, 2020 and then 2021. So it's been, only a few years since they've used it.
Yeah, and listen, it's normally that star type player or a near top of the market guy that gets that franchise tag. And so, it's a good problem to have sometimes because it means you have good football players that you don't want to lose. But it doesn't always, it's kind of dependent on the position and you want to use it for the right guy. And that's not to say that the Broncos don't have valuable free agents that they could bring back. And, we'll just have to see kind of, George Payton talks about this sometimes where there's a value and you've got to make it work for both sides. So I'm not saying that there's not free agents the Broncos have that could be good to have back. It just doesn't necessarily always fit with what the franchise tag is intended for.
Right. I don't know if a lot of people know this, Eric, but Pat Bowlen and John Elway were actually the ones to kind of introduce this idea of a franchise tag back in 1993.
Wow.
I don't know if you know that or not.
No, I didn't know that either, Sid.
Yeah, so Mr. B was afraid of letting go of John, so they kind of made this. It was originally called the Elway Rule, which kind of formed now into the franchise tag. So kind of fun.
Yeah, you learned something.
Fun little connection.
Nice little tidbit there.
Yeah. Well, Eric, in other news, we will be heading to Indianapolis next week for the NFL Combine. Exciting stuff. We'll be there all week. What are you most looking forward to next week?
Yeah, I think it's one, typically we tend to hear from the head coach and general manager as far back as I can remember. Since I've been covering the team, we've heard from those guys. So hopefully that'll take place next week. And it's always interesting to hear kind of what they say, what they don't say, both about free agents. Certainly Russell Wilson, if Sean Payton and George Payton are available, will be a topic of conversation, I imagine.
Definitely.
Some of these rookie quarterbacks, what you look for in a young guy, I'm sure will be a question that's posed, again, if we hear from them. And that's just, you kind of get to start to hear a little bit more info, and it's kind of like that first taste of what can you expect for this offseason and how this team is going to attack things, because now they've had a chance to do film review and look back at this past season and evaluate players and coaches and themselves. And you know, we've seen a couple coaches move on. We've seen a couple coaches be hired here. And so I'm interested to hear Sean Payton, if he's speaking kind of those thoughts on, you know, adding Pete Carmichael, adding Jim Leonard.
Right.
That stands out to me. And just, you know, every coach has to kind of play it coy this time of year, general managers too, of who are you going to take? What do you want to do? What's the strong area of the draft? And I think the more you spend time around these guys, the more that maybe you feel like, at least, ooh, is there a little nugget there, or like a little bit of truth among the smoke screen? And then kind of trying to piece all those little bits of information together to form the puzzle of the offseason is interesting. So
Definitely.
That's one element. And then just, I think the ability to see some of these quarterbacks. I mean, obviously there's more positions the Broncos could target. We don't know yet what the plan is going to be with Russell Wilson, but if they do choose to target a young guy, or at least consider a young quarterback, you know, what do they look like out on the field? How do they sound when they talk to the media? Kind of what is their command? You know, I think you see a lot of quarterbacks have that commanding presence
Absolutely.
in the locker room. You know, what do they say when they're asked tough questions? How do they throw the ball? How do they do, you know, from a Michael Penix perspective, what are the medicals? Right. There's a lot of pieces of information, again, that you get on these guys. And anytime it's quarterback related, it's always a little bit more exciting, just because it's such a prominent position. So
Absolutely.
Got a little taste at the Senior Bowl, and now this is kind of the next big step. And then from there, it's just kind of, you know, nothing really happens after that, right? Like free agency happens, and it maybe changes your needs, but
For sure.
there's pro days that can adjust things a little bit. But this draft order is going to start to get, you know, more and more firm. We know that at the combine, sometimes deals get talked about in terms of, you know, guys being sent around the league, or, you know, draft day, you know, or draft related trades, those sorts of things. So it all starts to happen in Indianapolis, and it'll be exciting to be there and kind of get this offseason kicked off.
I think so too. It's always an exciting time of the year. I always enjoy going to the combine every year. Eric, you mentioned some of the, you know, rookie quarterbacks. Is there any specific prospect that you're looking forward to hearing from?
Hearing from, you know, just maybe like a JJ McCarthy, just in terms of, or a Bo Nix, you know, a Michael Penix, kind of guys in that second tier, maybe.
Right.
But I'm more excited to see him throw and compete. And
for sure,
you know, sometimes a guy or two will say, I'm not throwing, I'm going to wait till my pro day.
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by who chooses to throw, who doesn't. And it feels like, because there's that cluster in that second group, at least kind of as it's being talked about nationally, you know, do all three of those guys feel like they have to throw. Or, you know, just so that they don't kind of get left behind in this competition. And then, you know, if you're a team and you love one of these guys, do you know, you've looked at the film already and you say, hey, this is our guy. Do you hope he doesn't have such a great performance this week so that he doesn't get taken before you have a chance to go get him? So it's just a lot of, again, smoke screens, mind games. You know, you look at all these mock drafts, and there's dozens of them already, and each one has the Broncos taking a different guy, and it'll change 15 more times by the time we get to April. But that's part of the fun of this time of year, is that you're not sure what the team's going to do. There's tons of possibilities, and it makes it exciting.
Definitely. Yeah, Eric, last one for you. What do you think is the value in seeing some of these guys in person at the combine then versus, you know, their pro days when you have chemistry with their receivers and whatnot?
Yeah, well, I think, one, it shows the competitiveness, right? Of, hey, I'm going to go out there, and no matter who it's with, I'm going to find a way to throw the ball, get completions, show off my skill set. When you have them all in this kind of the same environment, there's control for some of the things like weather, or are their pro day receivers a little bit better than the other guy? They get to a chance to work with the coaches there. But, you know, I think the on-field stuff is it's obviously just a part of it. It's the meetings with the teams. You know, how do they do on the whiteboard, drawing up plays or discussing coverages, you know, or talking about their backgrounds, their character, that sort of thing. It is the media element. It's the medical element. And then the biggest thing, and I think we, for good reason, cover this, and it's exciting and it's fun. But the big thing is what they did on the field the last however many years, right? And so you don't want to, I think, forget that. And, you know, fans maybe fall in love with the way somebody performs at the combine. These scouts, these coaches, they know that what happened on the field is what matters most. And so this is just additional information you try to use to make a decision. And when you're selecting a quarterback, obviously it's a huge decision. And so you want to make sure you have all the information you can possibly have to make an informed decision and hope that that guy can lead you forward. And we'll see if the Broncos decide to go in that direction. There's obviously a lot of different ways they could go. We've seen edge rusher, we've seen defensive lineman, we've seen tight end, receiver, corners. People have basically mocked every position imaginable to the Broncos. And I think when you haven't had a first-round pick in a couple of years, you need that top-end talent. And so I don't think the Broncos can go wrong. And that's another reason that I'm excited for the Combine is that the Broncos haven't had a first-round pick in a couple of years. They've got a chance to add a real difference maker to this roster. This gives you a chance to go find him.
Well, like I said, Eric and I will be at the Combine next week, so we'll have a lot of content on DenverBroncos.com and the social media channel, so everyone be on the lookout for that. Eric, appreciate you joining the show today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube next week for another episode. I will see you all then.